Thanks, Tim. So everybody, hope everybody's doing well today. So Bruce Szabo with Microsoft, been here about 13 years, dabble in. So as a account technology strategist, I get, inch deep, mile wide would be the analogy that I use. So one of the things I've been exploring lately is cognitive services. So definitely an intro if you're into ripping into JSON files and passing tokens back and forth from a developer series. That's probably something a little bit deeper than what I'm going to go into. But what I would like to do is just go over and level set where cognitive service fits in from a Microsoft perspective. Then I'm going to show you an API Explorer. So how do you dig into these? Then an example with text analytics and Power Automate, and then an intelligent kiosk. So exploring from, hey, what can it do? Here's maybe a small use case, and then if I was into a development environment, Intelligent Kiosk does a good job of showing you, some good use cases, and it's something you can download and explore on your own. I think starting, what I want to level set when we've done this presentation, I've worked with a couple of others, is if you look at the Microsoft mission, you understand cognitive services a little bit more. We want to empower people to be able to do more and organizations to do more. So with that, cognitive services plays a big role in that, and taking things away from, say, the machine learning and deep data scientists and tries to make them accessible. My goal for you, the 70 so people I saw on the call today, is try it. Hopefully you get as excited about it as I have. It's one of my passion technologies right now, is playing around with it and finding things to do with it. It's especially gratifying when I actually figure out how to use it. From what Microsoft's doing with cognitive services is democratizing artificial intelligence. So no longer do you have to, have a data science degree and know different, distributions and algorithms to go in creating a machine learning workbench, having a bunch of data, testing it and training it. Some of that testing and training in those services are all now being bubbled up as actual services, so you don't have to start at the raw data and raw data sets. What's also coming along in this cohesion of deep learning advancements is that we are getting better and better to human parity. So we can trust the computer more to do things, or technology more to do things on our behalf. So one of the things that you would do is you'd maybe do text to speech or speech to text, and then you'd have to go through and correct everything. It might help a little bit in that you've got you saved yourself a bunch of conversion time, but you still had to read through and make sure that the conversion was 100% correct. That's starting to be less and less the case. Some of these services now are being used in production with no back checking or spot checking of some of the results. And even with human error, in some of the text, you've seen it when you're looking and you see closed caption at an event or whatever, and you see the typos that are happening that just go through the system. So even when we have humans doing some of the conversion, it isn't 100% accurate. So you're starting to see these deep learning advancements get closer to human parity. So what's in cognitive services and the things that you can wire up: vision, speech, language, knowledge, and search. I've highlighted in yellow the ones that I'm going to look into and sort of, I'll show you some of the demos based on these. But what I want to do is show you, I've shown you, like, I don't know if you're to measure it, like, 1/5 or 1/10 or less of the actual services that are available. As a matter of fact, when I was going through and prepping this, I ended up on content moderator and went down a rat hole on wondering what I could do with content moderation. Some of that I'll show you a little bit when we're going through this. One of the things that happens, though, is while we have cognitive services and we have the base, like custom vision available, you'll want to play with things and maybe make them your own. So you'll want to have a set of data of pictures, and I'll show you that one of them where, maybe it's your employee base, and then when people walk in, you can say who that person is. You need to custom. It doesn't know that, even though I have a vision service, when I walk up to or use the vision service, I can't take a picture of my face and know it's me. I have to have a training set that says, hey, this is what Bruce's look like, or this is what Bruce's family looks like. So now that I know what they look like, I can have a pretty good understanding of who they are. And maybe, you could think of a cataloging service for your photos that would go through a folder on OneDrive using Power Automate and put pictures or categorize them or add metadata. Those kind of decoration services are perfect for cognitive services. So what does it look like? Pretty much you set up the service, you get your key, you connect to the service, start having fun. I mean, it really is that simple once you've got the basis for what you want to do. So let me show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. So hopefully, I'm sure by the end of the day, you know, portal.azure.com gets you into this portal interface and you can start to play around with things. In this case, we're going to talk about cognitive services, which is, you know, front and center for me right now because I've been playing around with a lot. But if you create a resource, it'll take you to the marketplace. Now, there's two ways to set up cognitive services. You can set up cognitive services, for example, and you go in and you create, you know, an actual cognitive service. And when you create it, the usual suspects come up. Now, I have a couple created, so I'll go in, but basically this is it. You get your right stuff and away you go. You can also go into, sometimes you'll want more specific services. So like text analytics, you can come in and create an exact, you know, something specific for text analytics and go in just specifically there. Some of this will change depending on the security models and things that you want to go into, which are, again, beyond the scope of what I was going to cover today, but digging in either specifically to text analytics or cognitive services as a whole. So once you get your cognitive service created, you end up and you go to the resource. So this is cognitive services. Here you can see all the different things you can play around with cognitive services. So auto suggest, computer vision, content moderation, etc. And what you really need then from that standpoint is a key and an endpoint. So you need to know where you want to go. So here I created this in East US, and here's the endpoint for the service. And then you need a key. I have a couple keys here. Clearly now after this, I end up, one thing about demoing these services is you always almost have to create your own service, because once you show your keys on here, somebody could literally write those in and use them. So once we have that, we go in and we say, we want to explore cognitive service. So we have a key. We can go out to the API Explorer for cognitive services and look at the different services that are available, and you can start to light them up. So if you go down and look through all the different services, there's pages and pages of the different APIs. And if you click on one of the APIs, you'll end up in a screen where you can start to sample and see what's going on. So in this case, I looked at the content moderator API. I told you it was one that I rat-holed in while I was prepping for this presentation. So when I went into the content moderator API and I want to play with it, I pick the endpoint. So I just showed you back on the cognitive service. So if I switch back to my cognitive service, I have the endpoint. I'm going to copy the key right now because spoiler alert, I'm going to need it. I come down and I look at the content moderator service, and it has all the header information that I need to pass in some information, all the correct parameters, the things that it wants to pull out of the response object. And it needs just that key. So that key that I just copied a second ago, I paste that in here. And if I look at it, you know, that looks like the key. It's this right key that I need. The only time I screw up is if you picked like the West region here and put in an East key, it won't work. So that's one of the things that you need to be careful for. It's always really, you know, hey, Bruce showed me that was really easy to do. And then I went out there and I picked the wrong region and things blew up and it wasn't as easy as Bruce showed you. Those really are the two things. Create the service, make sure you're in the right region when you're exploring the APIs, and they will allow you to pick the region. So before I went into content moderator, you can pick which region. You know, I clearly picked East to get to this tab here. So then hopefully this doesn't offend. Hopefully the naughty word in here isn't offensive to anybody. This is the one that's posted on the website by default, so I picked it out. So here's a sentence here that I'm going to send into the content moderation service. And it creates the header the way I need it. And you can see then it posts. If I looked before, if I scrolled down, you would have seen this empty. Now it's put the key in there, and I can send this request out to the content moderator service. And you can play around with all the APIs. Now, quite honestly, every time I see curly brackets, I'm going through desensitization therapy to deal with curly brackets, because JSON, like I really liked comma separated files, which probably dates me a little bit, XML, and some of the JSON that comes back, I'm starting to get more comfortable with. And again, by desensitizing myself and making myself use it. So here's what comes back, and this is what we parse, the JSON payload that we'll parse and our services will parse for us. That's why I like ready-made services like Power Apps and Power Automate. That's my speed because it parses this for me. But now I bring back the the PII information, email, the IP values, the phone number, the address. If I dug in, so I dug in a little bit. I went out to the services and looked at what content moderator is. So I'm going to switch over. You can, when I dug into content moderator and what it is, I went through and read about it. And basically, this category 1, category 2, and category 3 are how racy the content is, especially if you're putting in pictures, and it'll give you a rating for how, if you want to tune something and say, in this case, the language came back as a bit rough or something that I might want to investigate. And it even called out the word that it found offensive when I was using the content moderator service. So that's really a quick, you could really spend all day out here playing around with these services to figure out the ones you want. And again, some of it is, I played around with the translation service and then text analytics. And when I was playing around with text analytics, which I'll show you here in a second, I realized it doesn't do translation. And it wasn't until I played around with it, like while I was trying to do something in a program, that I realized I didn't know exactly what text analytics did. I just assumed it did translation. So playing around with these services in this environment gives you a good idea for what information you need to do, or which services you might need to cobble together. So again, I hopefully demonstrated, set up the service, got the keys, connected the service using the API Explorer, and was able to leverage the service portal. In the deck, I'm sure we'll pass it out. This is the link to where I was going through the API Explorer. So it took a little while sometimes for me to find that. So I put the link in the deck so I remember how to get there. So if I said, hey, this is how you play around with, API Explorer, we're going to do the same thing now with text, with Power Automate. We're going to wire up something to Power Automate in order to play around with two services, translation and text analytics. So here's the flow that we're going to play around with. Let me go back home and show you. I can create connectors in 2 ways. So the first thing I need to do if I'm playing around with Power Automate or Power Apps is figure out which connectors I need. I go back out, I create the keys and the endpoints that I need. But then as I create my service, I'm going to create data connectors. Now I've created the data connectors, so if I were to just create a new flow, it'll prompt me for the endpoint and keys. But if I come into the data and I look at the connections that I'm using, I'll show you the 2 that I'm using in this Power Automate and how you would edit it. So here's I'm not using content moderator here. I'm using text analytics as one of them. So if I come in and I say edit, what I like is here, pick the site URL that you want. In this case, for text analytics, the one I set up for this application that I created was in the West region. And then I put in the account key and away to go. This is what happens when you work for Microsoft. It always defaults to the West, even though I tend to use the East. So this is how I would set this up. Nothing more to that. Have text analytics in play, and then I can start using it in Power Automate. So let me show you what I wanted to do with Power Automate. So I have a file of, I call them tweets, but I have a text file. So outbound tweets. I played around with a couple of things. So if they don't look like tweets, please bear with me. But I have an outbound tweet. I want to get the sentiment analysis. I want to get the key phrases. These are both things that can be brought back from the text analytics service. And then I wanted this converted to Spanish and converted to Korean. So my thought process was, hey, maybe I want to have a tweet system. I want to, make sure that the tweets that are going out have the sentiment that I want. I want the key phrases. Maybe I want a word cloud if there's things that I want to show, or these could be inbound tweets that I want to analyze it for my company. And then I may want a conversion to them. Also, I talked about, potentially adding like content moderation. Maybe if something is offensive, I don't want it to go out. So that's the file that I'm going to work with. So I created a flow here, and I'm going to jump in. I do hate the cooking show where it's already put together, but in a half hour, I had to go with the cooking show. But let me walk you through the steps. So I'm going to manually trigger this flow. So I have this Excel file that I want to convert. I could trigger off a tweet if I wanted something, that gathered tweets and looked. That's definitely something that's available in Power Automate. I need a variable. So one of the things that if you looked at key phrases, it brings back a table of key phrases, and I want them to go in a single column in Excel. So I'm going to have to loop through those and append those together. So what I do is I say, hey, go get the rows in the table. And you can see, did nothing more than connect to OneDrive to get those rows in the table. And then for each row in the table, I'm going to have to apply to each value in the table. I'm going to loop through it. And so for each, in this case, value, I'm going to look at a row. And the first thing I did was I translated. It has more to do with how I started this project. But so the target language I want is Spanish, and I want the outbound tweet translated. So boom, I do that, and then I update the row. So what's really cool, this was out there. I think I looked up something like, Power Automate with Excel or something to get a sample for it. They were doing something quite different, but this is what I needed to do. And then, so I pump back into the ID. I need the ID so it knows which tweet to match with which translation. And so the translated text I put in the Spanish base. So hopefully now you'll get to see, what's going on here. There's not a whole lot different here. I put, Korean in here and got my Korean row or Korean translation. Updated that row, and then I detected the sentiment. So went out and, same type of thing. So those three are the same. Just make the call, come back, populate the row. What got a little bit more involved was when I went through key phrases, because a table comes back. So I send out the tweet, it's in English. I label which, key phrases I want. And then I have to go out and say for each document that you bring back, so goes out, each row goes out, brings back a document of key phrases, and I need to loop through those key phrases and append to a string of key phrases. So all I do is take the current item from the key phrases, append it, space, comma, and got that, and then I update the whole row with that information and set my variable back to nothing so I can go through the next one. So if I go through that, I can run this just for completeness sake. I click on test. I'll perform the trigger action, hit test. It connects to the service. I run the flow. What's really nice with Power Automate is you get a visual of what's going on while it's running through things. So it takes a couple minutes to loop through this. So I will, back to the cooking show analogy, I will pop out and show you. Already got one in there. But the complete set looks something like this. So here I can see I got my sentiment. There's not too much there. Bad news when I told somebody that they had to change their alternator. And then you can see the different key phrases that it pulls out. One of the things you could do with something like this is create a word cloud. So if you have a company, you trigger off a given tweet or your company's name, you can go through then and figure out sort of which tweets to look at and what to do, and then create a word cloud using Power BI or some such. So that's really, I really enjoyed how easily it was to use the Power Platform to play around with this. That's my area of choice, but you may have others that you want to play with. I just wanted to give you a demo of like, hey, if I'm going to say make it real, what's some system that you could make it real with? So that was that was, hey, how do I take this and do something real with a cognitive service? So hopefully that showed you something that you can do, give you some thought process. So now, hey, I can go out and look at all the cognitive services with the API Explorer. I can load them up with the Power Platform. I also did a text translation. If you looked at my Power Platform demo, I wired one of these up where the focus was on Power Apps. I focus more on Power Apps and then how to wire up something. This is maybe the obvious. This is a cognitive service and what I can do with it. And then one other area that I wanted to explore was something called the Intelligent Kiosk. So the Intelligent Kiosk, you can download this app that I'm about to show you from aka.ms/kiosk app. It's super great for exploring the various things that we can play around with. I may have a little bit of more time to show you some of the other things that can be done with it. But I had one demo that I wanted to show because it explores a couple of things with Intelligent Kiosk and with the Cognitive Services API. So this is a customization one. So if here's the Intelligent Kiosk, this is the opening screen. Now I've picked the various ones that are my favorites here, but you can pick other ones. You can scroll down somewhere here. You could scroll through this and look at the various, depending on what you want to do. There's a ton of different demos that you can walk through to, again, show your corporation or things that you have, or maybe you have an idea. This is a good way to jumpstart. So while you can download from aka.ms Intelligent Kiosk app, this is also available on GitHub. So you can download these samples and find out if you are a coder, how exactly to code up these samples. So one of the things that I did is I was playing around and I said, hey, I have some pictures. The spoiler alert, I have one. So I have a picture with Joe Charbonneau and Len Barker that I took at an event. So I had the picture and I was like, could I identify it? So I went out and I basically said, hey, I want to look for some images, and Bing brought back these different images of Joe Charbonneau, and I was able to do the same thing with Len Barker. And I've even added myself in here and my daughter for extending the demo a little bit. And then once you play around, you add those, you do something called training. So this is, if you go and you dig into cognitive services, or you walk, if you go out to docs.microsoft.com and you walk through what they demonstrate, they'll show you this concept of training a model and then pulling the information out of the model and using it. They do that with some paintings and some ability to actually categorize paintings. It was a really cool example to play around with, how you would do it from a code specific standpoint and working with the training that they have there. Here they've built the app around it, so I have that trainer, and if I go back to, I've set up my faces, and if I go into the Explorer, I can go look at a local file and pop out this picture that I had of Len Barker and Joe Charbonneau. Now look, Len and Joe have, well, we've all probably aged a little bit, but I literally had their baseball cards. But the Explorer will find the face points on the person. So even with sunglasses, found out these points, 73% sure that it's Len Barker, a lot higher on me because I don't, the pictures I picked, and it was a lot closer to where I am from an age standpoint. It'll tell you, well, it was a few years ago, but not maybe that many years ago. So I like the age that it's giving me. And then, the same with Joe. It'll pick out emotions and then tell you things about like pose, the image quality, things that you can then do to explore this. So it's a really good app for that. If I wanted to try another image, in case you didn't believe me, I pull out this one where there's my daughter, who I trained on my daughter, and I think I have a Christmas card image of my family. So it'll pull out, and in the images it should recognize, in some cases it'll recognize me. In some cases, even though my daughter's in there twice, it only recognized this picture of her and not the other one that she was in. It got one of me as well, so but not the other. So getting better and better. If I trained it more with different types of images, it would be a lot. This goes up. So one of the things is, how many images do you need to train with, and what are the quality of the images? So I encourage you to go out when I talk about, play around with this and see what you can do. There, again, a lot of different things. If I look at looking at forms or exploring forms, the natural text-to-speech it has some examples of how the voice fonts. So when you're speaking, you can actually wire up voice fonts to give different dialects and different voice types to your responses. And they're getting less and less computer-esque. As it used to be very, very easy to tell when a computer was talking to you and when a person was talking to you. That's getting more and more difficult. So hopefully I showed you that, and this is in case things don't work. Always have a backup plan. This was my backup plan there. And then I think with that, I am done, and we're supposed to be on break so that people can eat and have lunch, and back in a little bit.